The bullet grazed past Juliana Zimmerman's shoulder close enough that she felt the heat of it, and her mouth opened to scream, but nothing came out except a strangled gasp that caught in her throat like broken glass. She pressed herself against the rough wooden wall of the general store, her carpetbag clutched to her chest, heart hammering so violently she thought it might crack her ribs. The sound of gunfire echoed through the dusty street of St. Joe, Missouri, and she tried to make herself smaller, invisible, anything but the terrified woman frozen in the middle of a robbery gone wrong. It was July 1878, and Juliana had arrived in town less than 2 hours ago, stepping off the riverboat with dreams of starting fresh as a schoolteacher in this Missouri frontier settlement. Instead, she found herself trapped between 3 masked men shooting their way out of the bank and the local law closing in from both ends of the street. Another shot rang out and she flinched violently, dropping her bag, watching helplessly as her few precious belongings spilled across the dirt. Then someone grabbed her arm and yanked her backward through a narrow alley between buildings. She stumbled, tried to pull away, but the grip was firm without being painful. A voice spoke low and calm near her ear, steady as a heartbeat. "Easy now. Just keep moving, don't look back." She couldn't have looked back if she wanted to. Her legs barely worked, and she let herself be guided through the maze of back passages until the gunfire became distant, muffled by distance and wooden structures. Finally, they emerged behind the livery stable, and her rescuer released her arm. Juliana turned to face him, still breathless, still shaking. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of aged whiskey. Dust covered his clothes and a worn hat sat low on his head, shadowing a face that looked carved from the same rugged landscape that surrounded them. A silver star gleamed on his vest. Marshal, then. He studied her with concern, his expression open and kind despite the hard lines life had etched around his eyes. "You hurt?" he asked. Juliana opened her mouth to answer and felt the familiar tightness in her throat, the words tangling together before they could form. I'm FF fine, thank you. I'm SS sorry, I just..." Heat flooded her cheeks. She hated this, hated how her tongue betrayed her whenever fear or nervousness took hold. The marshal's expression didn't change, didn't show the irritation or impatience she had grown accustomed to seeing. Instead, he simply waited, patient and still, as if he had all the time in the world. She tried again, focusing on breathing, on the techniques her mother had taught her years ago. "I stutter when I'm nervous." Something shifted in his face then, a softening around his eyes, and the corner of his mouth lifted in a smile that transformed his entire countenance from stern lawman to something infinitely gentler. "Then I'll spend forever calming your heart," he said quietly. The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound, and Juliana felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. Before she could respond, shouts erupted from the main street. The marshal's attention snapped toward the sound, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. "Stay here," he commanded, then seemed to reconsider. "Actually, you're new in town, aren't you? Where are you staying?" "The B boarding house. Mrs. Patterson's, but my bag." She gestured helplessly toward the general store. "I'll get it once this is settled. Wait in the livery. Stable master's name is Old Pete. Tell him Marshal Wade Norton sent you. He'll keep you safe." Before she could thank him, he was gone, moving with a fluid grace that seemed at odds with his size. Juliana stood frozen for another moment, her mind replaying his words. "Then I'll spend forever calming your heart." Had he meant it the way it sounded? Or was she reading too much into a kind gesture? The livery stable was dim and smelled of horses and hay, a familiar comfort that eased some of the tension from her shoulders. An elderly man with a wild gray beard looked up from where he was brushing down a chestnut mare. "Help you, miss. Marshall and Norton sent me. Said to wait here until things are settled." Old Pete nodded sagely, as if beautiful young women frequently appeared in his stable fleeing gunfights. "Wade's good people. You'll be safe enough here. Want some water? You look like you could use it." She accepted gratefully, sinking onto a hay bale while Pete fetched a tin cup from a bucket. The water was cool and clear, and she drank it slowly, trying to steady her nerves. Through the open stable doors, she could see a slice of the street, dust still hanging in the air where horses had churned it up during the chaos. "You the new schoolteacher?" Pete asked, settling onto another bale with a grunt. Juliana nodded. "How did you know? Small town. Word travels. We've been expecting you for near about a week now. Some folks worried you changed your mind. The boat was delayed in Kansas City. Storm damage to the paddle wheel." Pete made a sympathetic noise. "Well, you picked quite a day to arrive. Those boys that hit the bank, they've been causing trouble up and down the river for months. Wade's been tracking them, waiting for them to slip up." Did anyone get hurt?" "Bank clerk took a bullet to the leg, but he'll live. Wade doesn't let things get out of hand if he can help it. Been marshal here for 3 years now, and he's never lost an innocent yet. Course, he's young for the job, but he's got the instinct for it." Juliana wanted to ask more, wanted to know everything about the man who had pulled her from danger with such gentle authority, but she bit her tongue. It wouldn't do to seem too interested, especially not on her first day in town. Instead, she asked about the school, about the children she would be teaching, about Mrs. Patterson and the boarding house where she would be living. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Marshal Norton finally appeared in the stable doorway, her carpetbag in one hand and her scattered belongings collected in a flour sack in the other. Dirt and gunpowder residue smudged his face, and she noticed fresh blood on his knuckles. "Are you hurt?" The words came out clear, steadied by concern for him rather than herself. He glanced down at his hands in surprise, as if he had forgotten about the injury. "Just scraped them hauling one of the outlaws out of a water trough. He decided to fight instead of surrender peaceable." "Did you catch them all?" "2 of them. Third one got away on a fast horse, but we know who he is. He won't get far." Wade set her belongings down carefully, then removed his hat and ran a hand through dark hair damp with sweat. "I should get you to Mrs. Patterson's. It's getting on towards supper, and you've had enough excitement for one day." Old Pete chuckled from his corner. "I'd say that's an understatement." Walking through St. Joe with the marshal at her side, Juliana saw the town properly for the first time. It was larger than she had expected, a thriving river settlement with neat wooden buildings lining wide streets. The bank stood at the main intersection, its door guarded now by a deputy with a rifle. People stared as they passed, curious about the stranger in the marshal's company, but their gazes seemed friendly rather than hostile. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house was a 2-story structure painted cheerful yellow with white trim. A woman in her 50s emerged onto the porch as they approached, her round face creasing with concern. "Marshal Norton, thank heavens. I heard about the trouble. Is Miss Zimmerman all right?" "She's fine, madam, just shaken up. Figured I'd escort her personally." Of course. "Come in, dear. I've got your room all ready, and supper will be on the table within the hour." Mrs. Patterson ushered Juliana inside with maternal efficiency, taking her bag and directing her toward a staircase. Wade remained on the porch, hat in hand. Juliana turned back, suddenly reluctant to let him leave. "Marshal Norton, thank you for everything." His smile was warm and genuine. "Wade, and you're welcome, Miss Zimmerman. I hope the rest of your time in St. Joe is considerably less dramatic." "Juliana," she offered in return. "And I hope so too." She watched through the parlor window as he walked away, his long stride carrying him back toward the center of town. Mrs. Patterson appeared at her elbow, following her gaze with knowing eyes. "He's a good man, that one," the boarding house keeper said quietly. "Lost his whole family to cholera 5 years back. Drifted for a while after that, working cattle drives and ranch jobs until he ended up here. Sheriff at the time saw something in him, deputized him on the spot. When the sheriff died 2 years later, the town council voted Wade in as marshal. Youngest one we've ever had at 26, but nobody's regretted it." Juliana's heart ached at the glimpse into his past. 26 years old and already carrying so much loss. No wonder his eyes held that particular quality of someone who had seen too much too soon. "He seems very capable." "He is. Now come, let me show you your room. You'll want to wash up before supper." The room was small but clean, with a window overlooking the back garden and a bed covered in a cheerful quilt. Juliana sank onto the mattress, suddenly exhausted. The events of the day crashed over her all at once, and she found herself trembling again, though whether from fear or the memory of Wade's words, she could not say. Supper was a quiet affair with Mrs. Patterson and 2 other boarders, an elderly clerk from the land office and a traveling salesman passing through on his way to Kansas. They asked polite questions about her journey and her plans for the school, and she managed to answer without stuttering too badly. But her mind kept wandering to a pair of whiskey-colored eyes and a voice that promised forever. The next morning dawned bright and warm, typical July weather for Missouri. Juliana dressed carefully in her best day dress, a practical navy blue with white collar and cuffs, and pinned her dark blonde hair into a neat bun. The school board had arranged for her to meet with several prominent citizens today, including the minister, the mayor, and the head of the town council. She needed to make a good impression, to prove that her stutter would not interfere with her ability to teach. Mrs. Patterson provided a hearty breakfast and detailed directions to the various locations she needed to visit. The minister's office is behind the church, and Mayor Hutchins keeps hours at the land office most mornings. The council head, Mr. Thornton, runs the feed store on 2nd Street. "You'll find them all very welcoming, dear." Juliana set out with determination, her portfolio of teaching credentials tucked under her arm. The morning air was already growing warm, and she was grateful for the shade provided by the wooden awnings extending over the boardwalks. The town bustled with activity, wagons and riders filling the streets, merchants opening their shops, housewives with baskets heading to market. She was halfway to the church when she heard rapid footsteps behind her, followed by a child's voice. Miss Zimmerman." Turning, she saw a boy of perhaps 8 or 9 running toward her, his face flushed with exertion. He skidded to a stop in front of her, breathing hard. "Marshal Norton says, can you come to the jail? He's got your things from yesterday, stuff that got scattered. Didn't want to bring them to Mrs. Patterson's in case you were sleeping." The flutter returned to her chest. "Of C course. Thank you for finding me." The boy grinned, clearly pleased with his role as messenger. "I'm Tommy. I'll be in your class when school starts. Ma says you're going to be the best teacher we ever had." His simple confidence warmed her. "I hope I can live up to that." The jail sat across from the bank, a solid brick building that also housed the marshal's office. Tommy pushed open the door and announced proudly, "I found her, Marshal." Wade looked up from the desk where he had been writing in a large ledger. He had cleaned up since yesterday, his face freshly shaved, his shirt pressed. The blood was gone from his knuckles, though she could see scrapes across the skin. "Thank you, Tommy. That's a nickel for your trouble." The boy accepted the coin with delight and dashed out again, energy apparently limitless. Wade stood, reaching for a small wooden box on the shelf behind his desk. "I went back this morning and found a few more things. A book, some hairpins, a locket. Figured they might be important." Juliana took the box carefully, looking inside at the recovered items. The locket had been her grandmother's and she had feared it lost forever. Relief flooded through her. "The L locket especially. Thank you so much. I'm glad I could find it." He hesitated, then added, "I wanted to apologize for yesterday. You had barely set foot in town before violence erupted around you. That's not the welcome you deserved. It wasn't your fault, and you saved me." She clutched the box, acutely aware of how handsome he looked in the morning light streaming through the window. "I would have been frozen there until—" "You did fine," he interrupted gently. "Most people freeze up the first time they're under fire. That's natural." She wanted to tell him that she froze up constantly, that her stutter had been the defining feature of her life since childhood, that it had cost her friendships and opportunities and made her feel perpetually inadequate. But those were not things you shared with a near stranger, no matter how kind his eyes. Instead, she said, "I should go. I have meetings this morning. School board business." "Yes, the minister and the mayor and Mr. Thornton." Wade nodded thoughtfully. "Reverend Hayes is long-winded but means well. Mayor Hutchins is fair. Thornton can be a bit gruff, but he's got a soft spot for education since his own daughter benefited from good schooling. You'll do fine with all of them." The confidence in his voice bolstered her own courage. "I hope you're right." "I am." He walked her to the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. "Miss Zimmerman, Juliana, if you need anything at all while you're settling in, please come find me. That's part of my job, making sure folks feel safe and welcome here." Was it her imagination, or did his voice carry a note of something beyond professional courtesy? She met his gaze and saw warmth there, genuine interest, and her heart did a complicated flip in her chest. "Thank you, Wade. I appreciate that." The meetings went better than she had dared hope. Reverend Hayes was indeed long-winded, spending nearly an hour detailing his vision for moral education combined with practical learning. But he listened attentively when she spoke, never showing impatience with her halting delivery. Mayor Hutchins was a brisk, efficient man who asked pointed questions about her teaching methods and credentials, then declared himself satisfied with her answers. Mr. Thornton at the feed store proved the most challenging, eyeing her skeptically until she showed him her letters of recommendation and her curriculum plans. But even he softened when she mentioned that she believed in teaching practical mathematics alongside traditional subjects. "Good," he grunted. "Too many teachers focus on fancy book learning and forget these children need to know how to measure grain and calculate costs. You'll do." By the time she returned to the boarding house for lunch, Juliana felt lighter than she had in months. The school term would begin in 6 weeks, giving her time to prepare the classroom and meet more of the families. Mrs. Patterson had already arranged for several parents to call on her throughout the week. The afternoon was too hot for much activity, so she spent it in her room, unpacking properly and planning lessons. But her mind kept drifting to the marshal's office, to the way Wade had looked at her with such warmth and respect. She barely knew him, yet she felt drawn to him in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. Days slipped into a pleasant routine. Mornings she spent at the schoolhouse, a one-room building at the edge of town that needed cleaning and organizing. Mrs. Patterson had recruited several local women to help, and they worked together scrubbing floors, washing windows, and arranging the desks that had been stored haphazardly. Afternoons brought visits from parents and children, everyone eager to meet the new teacher. Juliana's stutter flared and faded depending on her comfort level, but most people seemed patient and understanding. Wade appeared at the schoolhouse toward the end of her first week, carrying a ladder over one shoulder. "Heard you needed some repairs to the bell tower," he said by way of greeting. Juliana looked up from where she was sorting through old textbooks, a smudge of dust on her cheek. "The R rope is frayed. I wasn't sure who to ask about fixing it. I'm volunteering." He set the ladder against the wall with easy strength. "Used to do carpentry work before I took up the badge. Figure I can replace the rope and check the structural integrity while I'm up there." She watched him work, trying not to be too obvious about it. He moved with confident efficiency, climbing to the small bell tower and examining the mechanism with careful attention. When he came back down for tools, he found her still watching and flashed a grin that made her pulse quicken. "Something on my face," he teased gently. Heat flooded her cheeks. "And no, you're very good at that. At climbing ladders, it's not too complicated." "At everything," she blurted, then immediately wished she could take it back. But Wade's expression softened, and he set down the toolbox he had been reaching for. "Not everything," he said quietly. "I'm still figuring out how to talk to a beautiful woman without sounding like a fool." Now her heart was truly racing. "You don't sound like a fool." "Good." He held her gaze for a long moment, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the attraction that had been building since that first chaotic meeting. "Juliana, I know this is forward and you can say no without worry, but would you consider having supper with me sometime? A proper supper, I mean, at the restaurant, not just as the marshal checking on a new citizen." She should say no. She barely knew him. It had only been a week. But her heart was already answering before her mind could construct objections. "I would like that very much." His smile could have lit the entire schoolhouse. "Tonight, or is that too soon?" "Tea tonight is fine." He finished the bell tower repairs in record time, testing the rope until the bell rang clear and true across the settlement. When he climbed down the final time, his shirt was damp with sweat and his hair disheveled, but his eyes shone with anticipation. "I'll call for you at 6. We can walk to the restaurant together. I'll be ready." After he left, Juliana sat down abruptly on the nearest desk, her legs suddenly weak. She had just agreed to supper with Wade Norton. A real supper, like a courtship. The thought terrified and delighted her in equal measure. That evening, she dressed with trembling hands in her best evening dress, a soft gray silk with delicate embroidery at the collar. Mrs. Patterson helped her arrange her hair in a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun, weaving in a ribbon that matched her dress. "You look lovely, dear," the boarding house keeper said warmly. "The marshal is a lucky man." "It's just supper," Juliana protested, but even she could hear the lack of conviction in her voice. Wade arrived exactly at 6, dressed in clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his hat in his hands. When he saw her descending the stairs, his expression transformed into something close to awe. "You look beautiful." "Thank you." The words came out steady, her nervousness paradoxically eased by his presence rather than heightened by it. The restaurant was a cheerful establishment run by a French couple who had immigrated to Missouri a decade earlier. They were shown to a corner table with a view of the street, and Wade held her chair with old-fashioned courtesy. The menu featured an intriguing blend of traditional American fare and French cuisine, and they both ordered the special, chicken in a cream sauce with fresh vegetables. "Tell me about yourself," Wade said once they had been served wine. "Where you're from? What made you want to teach?" Juliana took a sip of the wine, gathering her thoughts. "I'm from Illinois, a small town called Greenville. My father was a minister and my mother taught at the local school before she married. I always knew I wanted to teach too." "Did your mother teach you how to handle your stutter?" The direct question surprised her, Most people pretended not to notice, dancing around it awkwardly. Yes, she was patient with me, taught me breathing techniques, ways to slow down and focus. It's worse when I'm nervous or upset. I noticed you don't stutter as much when you're comfortable. No, I don't. She studied him across the table, this man who seemed to see her so clearly. Most people find it irritating. Then most people are fools. His voice was firm, brooking no argument. It's just part of how you talk. Doesn't change the quality of what you're saying. Something tight in her chest loosened. Thank you for that. Their food arrived, and the conversation flowed more easily as they ate. Wade told her about growing.